Okay, welcome to my presentation on networked gaming challenges and solutions. So, networked gaming. This is all gaming done over a network. Obviously, the internet's the big one, but we used to do LAN parties. We did one this weekend, right? LAN parties exist where you're connected over just a switch locally, or when you used to do a peer-to-peer connection where you used to connect one DS to another DS with a little cable, right? That was networked gaming. And obviously everything's internet based now, but even before that there were options. So nowadays we got your shooters, your MOBAs, and all those games that are online all the time. And then you've got your games that don't seem obvious about being networked, but are because of restrictions on like anti-piracy measures and stuff like that. That's your Diablo 3, your SimCity, and your Need for Speed, right? These ones are still online all the time. It's just not obvious because you're not using online components, but they are online all the time. This doesn't typically go well, so if you're ever going to make a game, don't put always online rules in there. People do not like it. So, network gaming started back with Maze War via ARPANET, so that's like pre anything we're used to, pre us probably, and it's moved on since then. Network gaming has grown from small niche to huge, massive industry. The largest video games themselves are like the largest industry of entertainment out there now at this point. Um, as you can see, most people play games. Most of those games are online, and a ton of revenue comes from that. You can even see that some games have huge, massive peaks recently. Some have high average numbers, and some new games are like coming out the door swinging, right? So the finals dropped with 7.5 million players over a 2 week period, right? So like that door is swinging. So before we get into the challenges and solutions of network gaming, we've got to go over some of the methods of network gaming, right? So when you think about network gaming, there are about seven different ways to do it. Typically, you'll have a mixture of these, not just one. You'll usually use a specific protocol with some HTTP and so on and so forth, right? So you got some variation and some flexibility that way. So UDP. So we're just going over this in class right now. This is when you sort of just barrage them with the data, and eventually they collect some of it. You don't wait for a response. You're just firing at the server over and over and over again, hoping eventually some of it gets received. Right. So this is going to be used a lot of the time for your FPSs and stuff like that. Anything with a very, very quick, short reaction time. This is where your UDP comes into play, right? Because you need to just be all like, oh, let me send 60 of them showing that I shot at the second, right? And then if you've got lag, that sort of hinders that and you get in trouble. And lag's one of those things we're going to go over as well, right? So yeah, this one you create a package, you encapsulate it, then you send it to the end IP, they receive it, they check for errors, they process it, right? You don't get a response back. You don't know if they got it. You just keep going, and then you stop for after a little while, right? So you just hope for the best, right? Then we got TCP. This is the handshake, right? So sync, sync attack, sync, or ACK, right? So boom, 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 which makes sense. This is the second one of the big ones that we're used to. You got a little diagram right behind my head here. So this is where you send the request, get it back with the acknowledgement, and then send an acknowledgement back, right? So this one's a little slower, but it's very, very like consistent, very the data's integrity is kept. It's very, very safe and consistent, and it's good for things like game chats, game updates, and accounts, right? So stuff that can move a little bit slower, but you also don't want to give the wrong information or have things come in a weird order and stuff like that, right? Then we've got HTTP and HTTPS, obviously Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and then the secure version of that. So probably just use the secure nowadays. It'd be weird if you used HTTP. I think that's what I said, but moving on. This is the standard one for moving across the web, right? This is most web-based game interfaces and stuff like that. This is what you can use for patches, in-game purchases. Like, in the game, you'll see this for the shops and stuff, right? The stuff that necessarily isn't gameplay, but it is still part of the game, right? Just a lot of time chats will use this. Lost Ark actually used a version of this, a bad version of this in their game, where you could send links and it would open the link, image links in the chat box, and people were using this as a form of griefing, and they were actually able to implement the way to drop people's network, not their network, their game. You could crash users' games by sending them specific things in chat there. like links that would just crash it instantly because it would open up and then crash the game. Very, very standard, but also make sure you're doing it right or else it could cause issues. Then there's REST, that's representational state transfer. It's statelessness, contains all information, to understand process requests, so just sort of send it and it's got everything it needs. Uses the get, post, delete methods, right? So very much the giant URL with the stuff at the end there, right? Pretty standard, nothing too crazy. JSON, XML, HTML. Again, very much same vein as the HTTP request, where you're going to use it for things that aren't necessarily the gameplay, but are related to the game itself. Achievements, right? Then you've got RTP. This is your real-time transport protocol. They use this for a lot of like voice chats, so think Valorant's in-game voice, or R6 in-game voice, or Overwatch in-game voice. Any in-game voice is going to use this a lot of the time. Video streaming and synchronization, right? Very, very good at low latency things. We got XMPP, Extensible Messaging Presence Protocol. Again, very much the same as the HTTPS and the restless one, where it's all about out of game usage, right? So out of gameplay game usage, right? So this is your in-game chat, your presence systems, right? So that's when the presence system is the idea that, say Steam, you've got Steam there, right? And Steam tells you your friend is away, online, playing a specific game. That's a presence system. It tells you where they presently are, right? Invitations, notifications, stuff like that, right? So this one here is very good about like notifications and stuff like that, right? The peer-to-peer protocols. This is your I'd say this is the third biggest in my opinion. So you've got your UDP, your TCP, and then I think you've got a bunch of different versions of the same idea, and then you hit the peer-to-peer, right? Peer-to-peer, that's when you're hosting it on one person's device and letting like accessing it from another, right? So this is going to be like your friend who's hosting their Minecraft server on their PC, you peer-to-peer to that, right? Or Among Us lobbies for the longest time were peer-to-peer, where one person would host and everyone else would connect to it, right? And sometimes your firewall causes an issue with this, but there's workarounds and stuff like that. But the nice thing about this is obviously it doesn't require a server from the game developer's perspective. So you sort of get each person to turn their computer into the server and everyone else comes in as a client. Very, very nice. You'll typically use this for like a LAN party where someone turns themselves into the server and everyone else the client, or direct player-to-player connections, like I said there, right? So those are the different types of networks. Now you've got a basic understanding of that. We can go into the different challenges and solutions, right? So there are typically 4 challenges, and those challenges are latency, bandwidth, DDoS attacks, and security, right? And each of these is going to have their own problem and solution, right? Oh, 1 second, sorry about that. So, latency. I'm not sure what I pressed there, and I skipped to the very end of the slideshow. But latency. Delays in data transmission between actions in response in game. So this is lag, right? Latency is where lag comes from. This is why so many people get mad, because they get the big old packet drop symbol, delays symbol, and then when you fire, it takes 6 seconds later for it to register, and then people get livid, right? This typically happens because of congestion, distance, and your internet quality, right? So if a ton of different people are trying to access the same thing as you, right? High server load, like tons of different people playing the game at once, sending in their packets to the same server set as you, boom. Or if a new game comes out and they don't have quite the amount of servers you want, right? If I have to play a game here with my friends in Ontario and we're playing in the Ontario data set, then the distance causes more latency, which gives me more lag, right? Makes sense. Typically, you'll see this represented as ping in game, right? So, tick, tick, pinging. High ping, that's high latency. That's where lag comes from, right? And then typically, obviously, your internet connection quality, right? So if you're playing on 5 megabytes per second internet, well, typically you're not going to get a lot of good internet speed, and you're going to have a hard time playing some online games, right? Obviously, the solutions have more server locations, have them better distributed, right? More servers means player data is moving less overall, meaning it gets to where it needs to go faster, right? And then obviously you could do some network optimization. Quality of service ensures that specific data, right, gets preferential treatment, right? With that little dot there where you go 0 or 1 and you tell it whether or not it's high priority or low priority, right? In the header, we got the bandwidth, right? Bandwidth, obviously, really, really important for high fidelity games. If you have low bandwidth, you're going to get a lot of reduced graphics, right? So when you come into a game and everyone's sort of like mushy looking, that's typically a bandwidth issue. Obviously, sometimes you get longer load times and buffering times, right? Slow downloads. Especially if you download a lot of patches for games. If your Steam library is like 1,300 games and you're downloading a lot at once, your bandwidth's going to cause issues there for you. If you're downloading patches while playing games, your bandwidth's going to cause issues for you, right? So a better idea of that. Instead of loading in all of the content at once or having it all loading in consistently all the time, you could send the content to the user based off their proximity, right? You get their position in the game file, and as they move, you spawn in the assets around them, right? Makes sense that way. That way you're not spawning in a full game's worth of assets around them at all times. You just load in what's needed, right? What they can see. Think Minecraft, how they do block loading. Do very much the same idea with your rest of your game, right? And then obviously progressive downloads. Load in the stuff, pull the important files first. Pull the really important stuff. Maybe the player can access a high score until after the update's done, but maybe halfway through the update they can play the game, right? Very, very useful idea. And then obviously compress it. Shrink your data files down and make it so that your game file isn't 100 gigabytes. Games these days are too big. They're filling up hard drives. Shrink them down if you can, right? DDoS attacks. These are classic. You played a game, the enemy team's losing. One of their teammates was like, oh yeah, I don't like losing, so they just blast the server with as much packets as they possibly can, hoping to crash the server, get everyone else in the game disconnected, and just make everyone have a bad experience overall, right? It'll either shut down the server, disconnect everyone's access to the server, or even just make it so that the latency and the ping is really, really high, right? Like I said, this is typically people who are just mad or trying to have, who are trolling, right? They're having a good time by making the experience worse for everyone else. The best way for this is to deal with this is to filter the traffic, right? That way one place can't send 1,000 packets in a millisecond or whatever, right? Like they preventing people from just brute forcing their way in, right? And destroying the experience for everyone else. You could also use Anycast routing, which spreads it amongst multiple places, right? So you've got 12 server sets. You could route the traffic between the 12 server sets so no one server just goes bogged down by everything coming its way, right? Security. This is obviously a big one. I personally have been recently hacked on my Discord back in the summer there. This matters, and obviously when you're hosting a game, when you're playing networked games, there's potential risk, right? Anytime you're interacting with outside parties, there's risk for hackers and security breaches and stuff like that, right? So typically this is going to show itself with breaching the server, right? They breach the server, they steal player data, you have to release a whole apology letter, right? The other thing is people might like this is why security is why you see that pop up in chat all the time when you boot up a new game and the game developers go, we will never ask you for your password, right? This is security because people who do ask you for your password, they go in your account and they trade away all your goods, right? They steal your game identities, right? Data breaches, again, and then also security would also come into play where hackers are trying to cheat in the game itself, right? So if you've ever seen easy cheat pop up when you're playing a game like Apex or Vanguard for Valorant, where it's stuck on your OS all the time. These are anti-cheat methods. These are security methods, right? So they're designed to help people from cheating. They do client-side checks, server-side validation, behavior analysis, right? This is why you typically see like footage, and also part of security is important things is they don't do the bans instantly once they catch you. They do it in waves, right? That way you don't know who got caught, right? That way you can't make a slight adjustment on each piece of line of code, right? If 100 people get caught at once, then you don't know what specific thing did it. And then obviously they're using things like data encryption, SSL, TSL to secure the data transmission. Two-factor authentication, right? So setting up your phone with Google Auth, doing things like that to prevent people from getting into people's accounts against their will, right? Lots of different ways to deal with each of these issues. And honestly, you're going to want to probably put a couple of each in, right? So probably 4 issues, 8 solutions. You want all 8 in. You want 8 out of 12 solutions I presented here would be a good idea, right? Just to cover your bases. But yeah, overall, as a conclusion, you can see here that network gaming is huge. It's only getting bigger. We use a ton of different network methods, but primarily like UDP, TCP, and then if you're having a fun little event, then obviously P2P. And then obviously each method all have challenges and solutions, and we should probably implement about 8 out of 12 of the ones I presented here. Obviously, there's tons more out there, but I'm already 5 minutes over my time, so that's probably enough. And I don't know how to ask questions on a video, so I guess email me if you have questions. Bye-bye.